If you woke up tomorrow in Nazi Germany with no power, no army, and no support, you would still be able to rise to absolute power in 10 years. Without propaganda, without an army, without money. Here's how Hitler did it. Exactly how he went from nothing to the most feared leader in history. It's 1919. There's this guy, young, broke, frustrated. He's renting a tiny, depressing room in Munich, barely scraping by. He fought in World War I, but now, the war's over. Germany lost, and things are bad, like really bad. The country's drowning in debt, inflation is making money worthless, people are starving, and, oh, let's not forget, the Treaty of Versailles just humiliated Germany on a global scale. It's a mess. And this guy, he's angry. No, scratch that, he's furious. He spends his nights ranting in beer halls, going on and on about how Germany's been stabbed in the back. And weirdly enough, people are listening. Like really listening. They're nodding along, clapping, cheering. And before you know it, boom, a movement is born. Fast forward just 20 years. Germany is at war. The world is burning. And the man in that tiny room, he's now one of the most powerful and feared leaders in history. If you watched our last video on the biggest moments of World War II, you already know how it all ended. But let's rewind for a second, because here's the real question. How? How does a failed artist, a guy who once struggled to sell his own paintings on the streets, rise to absolute power? What went so wrong that millions of people not only followed him but worshipped him? Well, don't be fooled. Hitler didn't rise to power by chance. It didn't happen overnight. There's no magic in this. He didn't just speak at rallies and wait for the masses to follow. No, Hitler exploited key moments, used fear to his advantage, and manipulated the system to gain absolute control. This wasn't about luck or chance. This was about strategy, about timing, about support even from his enemies. And that's where most revolutions fail. They miss the right moment. But Hitler didn't. He knew exactly when to strike and what to do. He played the game better than anyone else. So, buckle up, because this is where things get really unsettling. Today, we're breaking down the top 10 factors that led to Hitler's rise to power. And trust me, it wasn't just about being in the right place at the right time. It was about making the right moves when the world was falling apart. Let's get into it, starting with number 10. The Treaty of Versailles, 1919. The humiliation that fueled the fire. All right, let's set the scene. It's 1919. World War I is over, and Germany? Well, Germany is on its knees. The war left the country in ruins, millions dead, cities destroyed, the economy in shambles. And just when people think it couldn't get any worse, boom. Here comes the Treaty of Versailles, a document so brutal, so unforgiving, that it basically kicks Germany while it's already down. Now let's be real, this wasn't just any peace treaty. This was a punishment. A full-blown, you lost the war? Well, here's the price you're gonna pay kind of deal. The treaty blamed Germany for everything. Every battle, every casualty, every ounce of destruction. And the consequences? Oh, they were heavy. Germany had to pay an insane amount of money in war reparations, like billions of dollars, which, by the way, they didn't have. Give up huge chunks of land, including key industrial areas. Shrink their military down to almost nothing. No big army, no big navy, no air force. And just like that, Germany wasn't just defeated, it was humiliated. Imagine being a proud nation, one of Europe's great powers, and suddenly, you're treated like a criminal. People were starving, unemployment was skyrocketing, and worst of all, hope was gone. And here's where things get dangerous. See, when people feel desperate, when they feel cheated, they start looking for someone to blame. And when that anger starts boiling over, that's when extreme ideas start sounding reasonable. Radical voices get louder. And one of those voices? Yeah, it belonged to a guy named Adolf Hitler. He hated the Treaty of Versailles. And honestly, so did millions of Germans. He called it a betrayal, a conspiracy. He told people that Germany hadn't really lost the war, that it had been stabbed in the back by its own leaders, by traitors, by outsiders. And let's just say, when times are tough, people eat that stuff up. The Treaty of Versailles didn't just punish Germany. It planted the seed of resentment, a resentment that, just a few years later, would help Hitler rise to power. And that, my friends, is why it's the first major factor on our list. Next up, a global economic meltdown that made things even worse. 9. Economic collapse and the Great Depression, 1929. The crash that drove desperation. All right, so now we've got a broken, defeated Germany. And just when it seems like things couldn't get worse, bam, Here comes the Great Depression. In 1929, the global economy goes off a cliff. The stock market crashes in the United States, and pretty soon, it a worldwide domino effect. Germany, already crippled by the Treaty of Versailles, gets hit hard. The country's economy is already in free fall, and now, with the Depression, things spiral out of control. Fact, unemployment skyrockets, and we're talking about millions of people with no jobs, no money, no hope. Sound familiar? I mean, it's like every day felt like a struggle for survival. People are starving, businesses are closing, and what little savings they had, gone. Poof. And let's talk about inflation for a second. This wasn't your typical rise in prices. This was crazy inflation. Money becomes so worthless that people literally need wheelbarrows full of cash to buy a loaf of bread. Yes, you heard that right. A wheelbarrow full of cash just for a loaf of bread. Now picture yourself in that situation. Every day is a fight to feed your family, and nobody seems to have answers. That kind of stress? It breaks people. Desperation sets in, and desperate people are willing to listen to just about anyone who promises a way out. And that's where Hitler and the Nazis come in. Now you've got to understand this. Hitler didn't just come in saying, "Let's make Germany great again." No, he did something far more powerful. He offered a scapegoat. He said, "Hey, you know why you're starving? Why you're broke? Why you're losing everything? It's because of those Jews, those communists, and the people who sold out Germany." He blamed anyone and everyone but the real causes of the country's misery. And millions of Germans? They ate it up. When your entire world is collapsing and someone tells you they have the answer, that's the kind of thing that gets people to vote for radical solutions. And radical is exactly what Hitler was offering. As the economy crashes, more and more people begin turning to him, desperate for a way to escape their misery. So that's how it goes. The Great Depression doesn't just ruin economies. It opens the door for people to embrace extreme, dangerous ideas. The desperation that came with the economic collapse was a perfect breeding ground for Hitler's message to spread like wildfire. 8. Weakness of the Weimar Republic. Democracy on shaky ground. All right, so let's talk about Germany's government after World War I, the Weimar Republic. Now, if you're not familiar, the Weimar Republic was the democratic government set up after the fall of the German Empire. And honestly, it was kind of a mess from the start. It wasn't like people were lining up to praise democracy in 1919. In fact, a lot of Germans were deeply skeptical of it. After all, they just lost the war, and their previous empire had crumbled. So, the new democratic system? Well, it didn't exactly inspire confidence. There was political instability everywhere. The Weimar Republic had no strong foundation to stand on. It was like trying to build a house on sand. And instead of being this solid pillar of democracy, it kept getting knocked over by political chaos. The government changed hands constantly. There were frequent elections, but hardly anyone got what they wanted. And the political parties couldn't agree on anything. People were frustrated, and it felt like the government just wasn't doing anything to help. And then there were the radicals, both from the right and the left, always stirring the pot. On one side, you had the communists demanding a complete overhaul of the system. On the other, you had the Nazis and other far-right groups who were openly hostile to democracy, calling it weak and untrustworthy. The government couldn't deal with the unrest or the violence. It seemed like every month there was some new crisis, and the public began to wonder, what's the point of all this? This constant instability created a crisis of confidence. The people were just tired of chaos, tired of ineffective government, tired of feeling powerless. And here's where things get really dangerous. When people lose faith in their government, they start looking for alternatives. They start thinking maybe a strong leader, someone who can take control, is exactly what we need. Enter Adolf Hitler. While the Weimar government was busy stumbling over itself, Hitler and the Nazi Party were building their image as the solution to all these problems. They promised order. They promised a strong Germany. They were offering something different, something that looked a whole lot more appealing than the chaos they were living through. Here's the thing, the Weimar Republic wasn't just weak because of all the political squabbling. It was weak because the people had lost faith in it. Democracy wasn't working for them. So why not try something else? And that something else was about to change the course of history. By the time Hitler starts gaining serious momentum, the public wasn't just looking for a leader. They were desperate for one. And that desperation? It was the perfect breeding ground for Hitler to plant his ideas. 7. Hitler's oratory and propaganda mastery. The power of words and images. All right, So before we get into how Hitler became the master of speeches and propaganda, let's talk for a second. Look, you've made it this far in the video, which means you're clearly hooked. I mean, you're practically invested now, right? So let me ask you, why would you want to walk away now when we're about to dive into the part where everything really starts coming together? You've stuck with me for this long. Don't just drop off when we're this close to cracking the code of how one man turned a broken country into a global nightmare. Seriously, this is the kind of stuff that should be on the edge of your seat. I can't believe I didn't know this kind of information. And if you're still watching, come on, do the right thing. Hit that button. You don't want to look back and say, oh, I could have finished this and learned something crazy. You know you want to be here for the full story. So, yeah, go ahead. Hit it now. I'll wait. All right, now that we're all caught up. Now continue. Hitler wasn't just a politician. He was an orator, a master manipulator of words. And let's face it, words matter. Hitler understood that on a level most people could never imagine. When he spoke, he didn't just communicate ideas. He mesmerized entire crowds. And those crowds didn't just listen to him. They felt his every word. Picture this.
Ich will dabei in Zukunft nichts anderes sein, als was ich in der Vergangenheit war. Warner meines Volkes, Lehrer meines Volkes und der Führer meines Volkes.
You're standing in a huge square packed with thousands of people, and Hitler steps up to the podium. The crowd goes silent, waiting. Then he opens his mouth, and it's like his words are electric. The tone, the passion, the timing, it's all perfectly orchestrated. The way his voice rises and falls, how he pauses just before dropping the next bombshell. It gets under your skin. And you're thinking, wait, this guy is speaking directly to me. Now, here's where it gets a little uncomfortable. Hitler's speeches weren't just about rallying people. They were about creating an emotional connection. And when people feel emotionally connected to something, they stop thinking logically. That's where things get dangerous. Hitler didn't need to be the smartest person in the room. He just needed to be the loudest, the most confident, and the one who could stir the most emotion. And he nailed it. But, and here's the kicker, Hitler didn't do this alone. He had Joseph Goebbels, his propaganda genius, making sure that his messages didn't just stop with the speeches. Goebbels understood the power of repetition. He knew that if you say something enough times, people will start to believe it, even if it's complete nonsense. So they started putting up posters, making films, sending out radio broadcasts, and even getting children's books to spread Nazi propaganda. They turned everything into a message of hate, superiority, and unity under the Nazi flag. It wasn't just about saying things, it was about seeing them everywhere. It was about feeding people's minds 24/7 with the same ideas. You couldn't escape it. And when propaganda becomes so ingrained in society that it shapes what people see, hear, and believe, that's when things start to get really scary. By the time it was all said and done, Hitler wasn't just a leader. He was a symbol. A symbol that was in every home, every street, and every piece of media. And once people started believing in that symbol, that's when they stopped questioning everything. They were ready to follow, no matter where it led. 6. Use of paramilitary groups, SA and SS. The violence that stifled opposition. All right, let's get into something dark, but absolutely crucial in understanding how Hitler really gained control. If there's one thing that helped him maintain power, it wasn't just his speeches or propaganda. It was violence. Now imagine this. You've heard Hitler speak. You're starting to buy into his message. You're angry, you feel betrayed, and you're ready to follow him. But guess what? There's one problem. Not everyone agrees with you. In fact, there are a lot of people who think this Nazi movement is absolutely crazy. You've got communists, socialists, heck, even regular people who are not so keen on the idea of a dictator running things. And in times like these, well, violence is the quickest way to shut them up. This is where Hitler's paramilitary groups come in. You see, these weren't just groups of angry men marching with banners. No. The SA Sturmabteilung, or brown shirts, were thugs, violent street fighters who weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. And what did they do? Well, they were the enforcers. They intimidated anyone who stood against Hitler. Political opponents? Attack. Union leaders? Beat down. Anyone who dared question the Nazis? Bam. They were ready. These brown shirts were the muscle of Hitler's rise. When the government wouldn't crack down on opponents, the SA made sure to do it themselves. They stormed rallies, broke up protests, and attacked anyone they deemed a threat to Nazi ideology. It wasn't just about political rallies or speeches anymore. It was about creating a culture of fear. They didn't just want to defeat their enemies. They wanted to make sure everyone was too scared to speak out. And let's not forget the SS, the Schutzstaffel. They were the more elite, disciplined wing of the Nazi forces. These guys were like the real enforcers. When the brown shirts didn't quite get the job done, the SS came in, tightening the noose around anyone Hitler deemed untrustworthy. They weren't just out for street brawls. They were the ones making sure that any dissent was crushed swiftly and permanently. And by 1933, Hitler had his tools of terror firmly in place. 5. Exploiting fear of communism. The Nazis as Germany's shield. Now let's talk about a key factor in Hitler's rise to power that really played to the fears of the German people. The year is 1930, and Europe is a powder keg. The Soviet Union is just next door. The Red Menace is rising, and communism is spreading. For the wealthy, for the middle class, for anyone who had something to lose, this was terrifying. Communism wasn't just an economic theory. It was a threat to their way of life. At the time, the Weimar Republic was unstable. People were hungry, frustrated, and desperate for change. And here's the thing, when people are scared, they're more likely to turn to someone who promises protection. And who better to offer that protection than Adolf Hitler? You see, Hitler and the Nazis didn't just play to the masses. They targeted the fears of the middle class and the elite. The fear of communism wasn't some far-off idea. It was real. Communist revolutions were already happening in Russia. And the last thing that the business owners, landowners, and conservatives in Germany wanted was the same thing happening in their own country. So Hitler gave them exactly what they wanted, a shield. The Nazis were anti-communist to the core. Hitler promised to protect the middle class from the rising tide of socialism and revolution. He promised to restore order and make sure that Germany's economy didn't get swallowed up by communist ideas. And for those who had money, land, and power, this was exactly what they wanted to hear. Hitler wasn't just an option. He was their savior from the communist threat. And guess what? It worked. The businesses, the industrialists, and even the military, they all began to support the Nazis because they saw them as a bulwark against the communist wave. They didn't care about the Nazis' extreme ideas. They cared about the fact that Hitler was promising stability, order, and protection from the revolutionaries knocking at the door. Now, this support wasn't just about words, it was about money. Hitler's rise wasn't only funded by his supporters in the streets. It was backed by big businesses who were terrified of losing everything to a communist revolution. Hitler became the man who could secure their interests, and he made sure they knew it. And when the elites backed him, they gave him the resources he needed. The Nazi Party gained legitimacy, funding, and a powerful network. Suddenly, Hitler wasn't just some radical fringe leader anymore. He was the man who could save Germany from the communist threat. And with the backing of the middle class, the elites, and big businesses, he was unstoppable. 4. The Reichstag fire, 1933, turning crisis into control. All right, now we're getting into one of the most pivotal moments in Hitler's rise to power, the Reichstag fire. You know, sometimes in history, moments that seem like disasters can turn into golden opportunities for those who know how to take advantage of them. And that's exactly what happened here. It's February 27, 1933. The German parliament building, the Reichstag, is burning to the ground. Flames are rising high, smoke fills the air, and chaos is everywhere. This isn't just some random fire. This is the Reichstag fire, a moment that would change the course of history. But here's the thing. Hitler didn't just see this as a tragedy. Oh no, he saw this as an opportunity. Now, here's where things get a little eerie. Hitler and the Nazis quickly blamed the communists for starting the fire. They claimed it was a communist plot to overthrow the government. And suddenly, the fear of communism that had been bubbling under the surface, it explodes. People are terrified that the communists are planning a full-blown revolution. And guess who has the perfect solution? That's right, Hitler. With the Reichstag fire as his justification, Hitler persuades President Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree. This decree was a game-changer. It suspended civil liberties across Germany, allowing Hitler to arrest political opponents, suppress the press, and squash dissent. The most important thing? It gave him the emergency powers he needed to act like a dictator. No longer was Hitler just a party leader trying to gain power through elections and speeches. No, he was now a man with the legal authority to suppress anyone who stood in his way. He didn't have to wait for votes. He didn't have to worry about opposition. Hitler controlled everything. and he wasn't about to let anyone stop him. And the terrifying thing is, the Reichstag fire didn't have to be real. Whether the communists really started the fire or not didn't matter. What mattered was that Hitler used it. He used that fire to instill fear and grab more power than ever before. And once the decree was passed, well, the Nazi regime could operate with total freedom. No more checks and balances, no more opposition to keep them in check. The fire that had burned the Reichstag gave Hitler the cover to burn away democracy itself. Now, with political opponents silenced, the streets safe for the Nazis, and the country in a state of panic, Hitler was ready to take the next step: complete control. And that, my friends, is how the Reichstag fire was used to turn a crisis into an opportunity to seize absolute power. 3. Political manipulation and deals with conservatives. The deal that changed everything. All right, here we are, political manipulation at its finest. By 1933, Hitler's popularity is growing, but he's still not in charge. The Weimar Republic is still limping along, and Hitler's Nazi party is gaining momentum. But here's the kicker. Key political figures and conservative elites are still underestimating Hitler. They think they can control him. They think, sure, he's gaining followers, but we can use him as a tool. He's just a loudmouth we can keep on a leash. Well, they couldn't have been more wrong. These conservative elites, people like Hindenburg, the president of Germany, and Franz von Papen, the former chancellor, thought that Hitler was just a puppet they could string along. They believed they could keep him in check once he was in power. Here's where Hitler shows just how crafty he is. He knew the conservatives were his ticket to power. So, he starts making deals. He promises them everything they want: the big businesses, the military, the conservative elite. He promises them all the things they crave in exchange for their support. And what does Hitler get in return? A seat at the table. He gets nominated as chancellor. Now, to the people who thought they could control him, surprise, surprise, Hitler's got other plans. What they didn't realize was that this was all part of his long game. Hitler didn't need to start a revolution. He was going to work the system, manipulate it, and sneak his way into power from the inside. Now let's pause for a second. If you're still watching, you're clearly following along. You're getting why this matters. And you're learning a whole lot. But if you're still here, don't just leave it hanging. Stick around. This is the kind of information that builds to something big. Don't miss out. Now back to it. Once Hitler was in the position of chancellor, the real work began. He didn't have full power yet, but he was already in a position to start pushing his agenda. And with his newfound position, he could now maneuver, manipulate, and use the system against itself to get the rest of the power he needed. The next move? Well, it was all about consolidating power, and that's exactly what Hitler was ready to do. He wasn't just playing chess. He was playing four-dimensional chess. And those conservative elites? They were simply pawns in his game. 2. The Enabling Act, 1933. The death of democracy. It's March 23, 1933. Hitler has already maneuvered himself into the position of chancellor, and he's starting to build his grip on the country. But he doesn't have absolute control just yet. He still needs something official, to solidify his power and eliminate any last shred of democracy. And that, my friends, is where the Enabling Act comes in. Now this law, on the surface, it looks innocent enough. It's called the Law to Remedy the Distress of the People and the Reich. Sounds harmless, right? It even sounds helpful. But here's the twist. The Enabling Act gave Hitler near total power. And here's the key part. It allowed him to pass laws without the approval of the Reichstag, the German parliament. Essentially, this act allowed him to rule by decree, bypassing the very government he'd just taken control of. It's like this. Imagine you're in charge of a country, but you don't want to deal with all the hassle of getting laws passed the proper way. What if you could just make them happen whenever you felt like it? No checks, no balances, just a straight line to total power. That's what the Enabling Act gave Hitler. And once he had it, he could pretty much do whatever he wanted. But here's the real kicker. The Reichstag voted on this law, but Hitler didn't need the majority. He'd already silenced his opposition, so it passed with just enough support. The communists? Gone, arrested, or locked up. Socialists? Out of the picture. Anyone who could have stood in his way was either too scared to speak up or too weak to stop him. With the Enabling Act in place, democracy in Germany was dead. Hitler now had the legal authority to rule however he saw fit. There was no longer a need for elections, no need for debate, no need for laws to be checked and balanced. It was just Hitler's way, or no way. And you know what's terrifying? It was all legal. Everything he did from here on out, the arrests, the suppression, the purges, was done under the law. He didn't need to break the rules. He was now the rule. Cult of personality and totalitarian control. The rise of the Führer. All right, this is it, the final piece of the puzzle, the one that turned Hitler from just a powerful leader into a totalitarian dictator. By 1934, Hitler wasn't just the Chancellor of Germany. He was the Führer, the man in charge of everything, the one who answered to no one. But how did this happen? How did a man who, just a few years earlier, was a struggling artist with big ideas rise to become the absolute ruler of Germany? The answer lies in his cult of personality and his ability to control everything and everyone around him. First things first, Hitler wasn't just a leader, he was the leader. And for that, he needed a persona, something people could believe in, something they could follow blindly. Hitler wasn't just a man, he became a symbol. He painted himself as Germany's savior, the one who would lead the country out of the depths of despair and back to greatness. He wasn't just offering political change, he was offering hope, and not just any kind of hope, but a grand, almost mystical hope. People didn't just respect him, they revered him. He was portrayed as a messianic figure, the only one capable of restoring German pride and strength. The Nazi propaganda machine worked overtime to create this image. In posters, in films, on the radio, and even in everyday interactions, Hitler was everywhere. And soon, the idea that Germany needed Hitler became the only idea. But here's where it gets even more dangerous. Control is one thing, but to hold onto that control, you need to eliminate anyone who might challenge it. And that's exactly what Hitler did during the Night of the Long Knives. In 1934, Hitler had his rivals, even within his own party, eliminated. The SA, the brown shirts, had been instrumental in Hitler's rise, but by this time, they had grown too powerful and too independent. Hitler knew that he needed to consolidate his power and take out anyone who might challenge him. So, in a brutal purge, Hitler ordered the execution of the SA's leadership, including Ernst Röhm, the leader of the brown shirts. This wasn't just a political maneuver, it was a statement. Hitler wanted to show the world that he wasn't just the leader of the Nazis. He was in complete control. The SA was reduced to nothing, and Hitler's rivals were wiped out in a matter of days. No more threats to his power. No more dissent. And just like that, Hitler had consolidated his power. The death toll was high, but the message was clear. Nobody was safe, not even those who helped him get to the top. By the time the dust settled, Hitler had full control, and the final nail in the coffin was his self-appointed title as Führer. With no rivals left standing, he didn't need the president anymore. The country was now his, completely, utterly, and irreversibly. And that's how it happened. The Nazis weren't just a political movement anymore. They were a way of life, and Hitler was the absolute authority. By 1934, he had complete control over every aspect of German society, politically, economically, culturally, and socially. He didn't just lead a nation, he became the nation. And with that, Germany was on the path to destruction. The world was about to see the full scale of what a single man, driven by hate and unchecked power, could do. All right, let's wrap this up. If you've been following along, you now know the real story behind Hitler's rise to power. The truth is, Hitler's rise wasn't inevitable. It wasn't some twist of fate that made him the dictator he became. It was the result of key moments falling into place at just the right time. And the scary part? It could have gone another way if things had played out differently. Remember when we started? If you woke up tomorrow in Nazi Germany, with no power, no army, and no support, you could still rise to absolute power in 10 years. That's exactly what happened here. It wasn't magic, and it wasn't luck. It was strategy, timing, and the ability to seize opportunities when no one else saw them. So here's the question for you. Out of all the factors we covered today, which one do you think was the most crucial in Hitler's rise to power? Was it the economic chaos? The fear of communism? Or was it the Reichstag fire that gave him the power he needed? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below, and let's talk about it. And, hey, if you found this video eye-opening and you don't want to miss the next chapter in this historical breakdown, don't forget to hit that like button. Subscribe and ring the bell so you're the first to know when we dive deeper into history's darkest moments. The algorithm loves it when you engage, and that helps get this important content to others who need to see it. This isn't just about history. It's about understanding the patterns and moments that shape our world today. So, stick around, because we've only just begun.